Hi, BookTube. Welcome to a non-fiction review. Today's book, on the page next to the table of contents, has this quotation from the comparative mythologist Joseph Campbell. It says, "People say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think that what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that our life experiences on the purely physical plane will have resonances with our own innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive." Campbell uses the word resonances, which suggests that he might agree with today's book, that wants to open out all the ways in which singing is just one of those experiences that provides that rapture. Today we are looking at Why We Sing, a celebration of song written by Julia Hollander, published in 2023, pages 356, of which 350 are the text. I'll say more about that structure later. The book was recommended to me, and this was some time ago, actually. I would say this must have been while I was on my Read What I Own challenge. And Gareth at Book Songs and Other Magic, I don't know what video it was in, he held up Why We Sing, and I was immediately attracted to the book. And so as soon as my challenge was over and we were on holiday up in Scotland, and I was in a Waterstones in Glasgow, I went looking for Why We Sing, and I bought my copy brand new there, so it is an owned book. You can see, though, I've shown you the prices on Kindle for both physical copy and ebook. I couldn't find anything cheaper online secondhand, and it is such a recent book. I wouldn't necessarily expect that those copies would be available, but keep looking. If you want to wait until prices go down, give this another year or two, and it may be on special offer. What do we know about Julia Hollander? She was born in 1965 in Oxford, and this photo that you see is one of her conducting one of her many teaching workshops, which she talks about at length in several different chapters in the book. She got her master's in English literature from St. Catherine's College, Cambridge, and she was also a chorale singer during her time at Cambridge. In case you're wondering, yes, Julia's brother is the British actor Tom Hollander, and together with their father, Julia and Tom, they presented a BBC radio documentary about their grandparents' escape from Czechoslovakia in 1939 and the letter which saved their family. Their grandfather received the letter days before Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia, and it was from the BBC, and it invited Hans Hollander to come to England. And because of that letter, he was granted a visa just in time, and he took Julia's father, who was just a toddler at the time, with them. And had that not happened, then we probably wouldn't be getting a book from Julia, nor would we see Tom on screen. Their father would almost certainly have been a victim of the Holocaust. At 25, Julia became the first female opera director at the English National Opera, and as at 2023, she was running the teaching workshops as part of her educational organization, Healthy Voices, and there will be loads of links in my description box. I'm not certain whether if you live outside the UK, you'll be able, for example, to listen to the BBC program about her grandparents' escape from Czechoslovakia, but please check that out. She does mention it also in the book and talk about it to some degree, not in the detail, though, that the BBC program covers. Structure. This is a book structured deliberately, I think, to be appealing in a popular sense and also uplifting. So if you were looking for something very academic or specialist with a lot of citations and bibliography and references so that you could do a study that delved deeper into the science behind singing, you may not find enough resource in this book because it doesn't contain a great deal. As you can see, there's just some acknowledgements at the end of the book and 4 pages of further reading. Julia Hollander isn't aiming her book at a specialist or academic audience. She is aiming it at the general public. And I can tell that because the font in the book is large. There's a half space between each line of text, 3/4-inch margins on the top and the sides. So she's presenting this book to be easy to read. She also refers to herself a lot in the first person, which would be normally discouraged in a more academic book. But she's very personal. Her writing style has mixed sentence lengths, 2 to 3 clauses long, but the clauses themselves are usually really short. I could give this example from page 278, where she says, "I tell myself my voice has been changing throughout my life, not just in middle age, and that's just fine." So you can just see that indicates the level of vocabulary, the kind of sentences she's constructing. Hollander does use some acronyms, some scientific or medical terms whenever they are necessary to present information correctly. But her writing is not going to force the reader onto Google in order to translate what is already being said in layman's terms. She writes in a popular register. These two things are noteworthy about this book. One, the sections of this book, they are thematically arranged to talk about singing and aspects of human life in chronological order from birth to death. The contents of each chapter discuss aspects of singing which relate to those times of life and what might be going on then. And so you might get biological, neurobiological, psychological, historic, mathematic, or sociological information sort of sprinkled throughout those chapters. There will not be, for example, a section about the biology of human singing and the human voice, and then another section about history of collective singing. It will not be arranged, again, with academia in mind. It's arranged to be a very personal book, to hit very personally. And okay, so that's my point too. In the writing style, as well as many things that Julia shares about her personal experiences of singing and teaching and parenting, it's a very warm, relaxed nonfiction read. It would make a great read for anyone who is intimidated by nonfiction, wants to dip their toe in for the first time. I'd say this would be a good book to do it. Or they're worried that nonfiction might be dry or bristling with a bunch of new vocabulary that will make reading slow and difficult. That's not going to be the case with this book. So in terms of content, what I'm going to do, rather than look at chapter by chapter, is look at the 4 parts the book is divided into, which each contain about 3 to 4 chapters. Chapter 1 is probably got the most biological science in it. It's the chapter called Birth, and what it describes is how the larynx and the vocal cords develop in the unborn fetus and also in the child's first years as they're growing up. And there's also some explanation as to how our ancestors became bipedal, and therefore our spine, instead of coming into the back of our skull, the way it does with most animals that are on all fours, our spine shifted to come up underneath our skull, and that changed the open spaces inside our head. And it's because of those open spaces, as well as the development and positioning of our vocal cords, that make humans and songbirds the only 2 species on Earth who can produce song the way we do. And the remaining chapters in the first part, they go on to talk about how the young human mind is so receptive to music and to singing. And for example, it seems that children are better able to retain information if they learn it in the form of a song. And that took me back, because I thought, wow, I have not in my adult years really tried, when I'm learning something new, to make it into a song to help myself remember. But I do know when I was young, my father taught me a song which contained our full home address and telephone number. And he taught that to me so that if I was ever lost and an adult who was trying to help me wanted me to give them information so they could contact my parents or get me back home, it would immediately come to my memory because it had been set to music. And that song I still remember in full, and I still remember that childhood address better than any other address where I have lived up until now. Part 2 of Hollander's book is called Feelin' Good. And you can see there again, you can see how comforting this kind of nonfiction is. It's very personable, very warm. And Hollander does a sales job here, and it's a good one. She succeeds in selling communal singing as an emotional accelerant. And I'm going to read from my notes here. She cites studies which show that groups who meet together in order to sing will develop feelings of affiliation and trust of their fellow singers sooner than, say, if they'd come together to paint watercolors or do some other handicraft. Or also that the heartbeats of performers who sing together will gradually synchronize, and apparently that's been measured. Or also that cortisol levels, our stress hormones, are lowered more quickly by group singing than if, for example, we met with a group of friends to just chat casually. So Hollander is speculating that maybe the reason that you can go to pretty much any culture around the world and you will find a form, a way, a time at which communal singing occurs is because it helps so much with group cohesion, and therefore it would indirectly help the group's chances of survival. The greatest benefit this part of the book did for me was to remind me about how to breathe. Now, I'm not a professional singer, but I did have some singing tuition when I was much younger, and I have belonged to several chorale groups. And I know that the best breathing for singing should push your lungs down and back. You should feel it in your lower back muscles. And then you should also try to exhale that breath slowly. What Hollander did was she documented her own experience because she gives breathing lessons to long COVID sufferers. And those lessons not only noticeably reduced their symptoms, the difficulty they had with breathing and other symptoms of the illness, but it also really reduced the anxiety and depression that naturally will come if you've got a baffling, debilitating condition. Hollander calls these lessons intentional breathing, and she's contrasting that with what she calls emergency breathing, which we probably all know when we're stressed. Our breathing gets faster, shallower, our shoulders move up and down, and they tense in some cases too, depending upon how stressed we are. Now, what researchers don't know for sure is whether the release of stress hormones triggers emergency breathing, or if emergency breathing triggers the release of stress hormones. But what they do know is there is a feedback loop, and that feedback loop can be cut by practicing intentional breathing. And all this comes under one chapter in the second section called Healing. And so if anyone has or is dealing with some kind of breathing difficulty caused by long COVID or asthma, I think this book, it'll be worth its money for that chapter alone. Part 3 of the book is called September Song, so now we're dealing with sort of just past middle age. And naturally, this seems the appropriate point at which Julia discusses some of the different religious music that she has helped to create, participated in. For example, she's sung Mass at a Catholic church, oddly enough, in the Czech Republic while it was still under communist rule. So that was interesting for other reasons. She also talks about joining a secret ritual while she was on holiday in Bahia, and that was using chants to connect with spirit entities that were believed in before colonial settlement in Bahia. And then also she spent time in Manipur, India, which is close to the border with Myanmar. And she was tutored in the sacred singing technique known as Sankirtana, and she practiced it. She was able to perform at a wedding. Now, one contrast that Julia makes, though, and I'll mention this as a by the way, between European and non-European religious music is that the latter, non-European religious music, seems to value the physicality of singing and moving to music. And she traces the European difference back to the Christian separation of the spiritual from the physical, which created a certain suspicion about physical expressiveness, even in the quality of the singing voice or the complexity of the melody. And on a more practical note, for those of us who are going through menopause or will go through menopause, whether we want to or not, Hollander devotes a chapter to revealing how the female singing voice changes as it ages and how singing practice has to change in order to meet the needs of older singers. I wasn't aware of that difference. That was interesting to know. And part 4 is called rocking chair. And of course, this deals with the end of life. Julia Hollander has spent over a decade actually visiting care homes, particularly where residents suffer from dementia, and providing music in order to stimulate the residents, their brains, their memories, but also to help them raise their dopamine levels, because of course in dementia, I understand the brain doesn't do so well at producing dopamine. And so adding music to the daily life of dementia patients helps them greatly with their symptoms. And these last chapters, I've got to admit, they were more anecdote than they were information. They slip almost into memoir, but it's lovely. And the stories that she tells about the residents and how they benefited and how they responded to the music in different ways is helpful. I think the biggest factual takeaway that Hollander shared was about MIT, or melodic intonation therapy. And how can I describe it? It's where people have lost the ability to speak. Aphasia, I believe it's called. They can be helped to regain their ability to speak if they participate in a therapy that uses tone, differences in tone, to help them learn again to make speech sounds. If they make them as if they are singing, they can learn again to make speech sounds and speak in full sentences. Hollander recommended a couple of YouTube videos which show the therapy in practice, and I've linked to those in my description box if you're interested. And I feel pretty sure that Julia Hollander knows about the tarot card numbering, because her death chapter, her chapter about dying, is chapter 13, which is the number of the tarot death card in the deck. And this is the most personal chapter. This is where Julia talks about losing her daughter, and describes the experiences that she's had singing for people who are in palliative care during the final days that they're alive. I don't have much to say in my rabbit hole section like I normally do, except that Why We Sing was so uplifting, so affirming, that I think it could be categorized as a little bit inspirational as well as factual. Only the amount of research data and information about anatomy and neurology anchors it into general nonfiction. But I found it a real tonic to read during January and that doldrum month in the Northern Hemisphere, right? When winter festivities are done, but spring isn't here yet. Why We Sing was an amazing book to read. If anyone needs a pick-me-up right now, I would urge them, find the book Why We Sing by Julia Hollander. She's experienced so much that is challenging, raised a daughter who had severe brain damage, had lost her extended family as a result of the Holocaust, and she shares these experiences while she's also sharing positive experiences of working to use vocal music for the benefit of people who are isolated by illness or old age. And Why We Sing just affirms again and again how good we can be for each other, if we choose to be. And it affirms how much we need to be musical. And Julia insists that more people can sing than think that they can. She generates a lot of hope and comfort while she's conveying all these facts. And that's this review done. The description box is packed, everybody, really packed with good stuff. And I'd encourage you to go look there if this review has interested you. I'll be back in a few days' time. In fact, I believe this Sunday I've got to get you on Middlemarch meditation, February, so short. Before you know it, you feel like you just barely ended January, but it will be. And I've been reading ahead in the chapter that we're covering. And oh my goodness, for those of you who've been Middlemarch meditation followers, things don't look good. Things don't look good in the story right now. But join me on Sunday for more of that. In the meantime, everyone, good reading. Hang in there. Take care. Bye-bye.